Well, welcome everyone. This is Margaret Smith, and I'm the Executive Director of the Trumpeter Swan Society, and I'd like to welcome you to our very first inaugural webinar about trumpeter swans. It's really great to have you here. I welcome you to that, and I hope you enjoy tonight's presentation and learning about trumpeter swans, the trumpeter swan family. Just so you know, the webinar is being recorded, and if you're a participant, you're muted and your video is off. If you do have questions, then we certainly welcome them. Just use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. So thank you. And our speaker tonight is Kelly Schouten, and she's going to be giving a presentation about a year in the life of a trumpeter swan family. Kelly is one of our board members, and she is an educator at the Kansas City Zoo and Aquarium. And I'm going to try to do this is, let's see if the gallery, Jim and Marianne, can you put your videos on so people can see you? So this is just so you know, all know, Jim and Marianne are also board members of the Trumpeter Swan Society. Jim is from the Yukon territory and Marianne is from Massachusetts, and they're helping us run this very first webinar. So thanks so much, you guys. If you want to turn your videos off, that'd be wonderful. And so, Kelly, are you ready to take it away?
I am ready. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, my name is Kelly Schouten. I am an educator here at the Kansas City Zoo and Aquarium. I appreciate y'all stopping in to learn a little bit about swans. So I have a few thank yous I need to just get done right off the bat. Kim Stevenson in Ontario, Trumpeter Swan Conservation there. Thank you so much for the use of all of your beautiful photos. Margaret Smith also, thank you for your beautiful photos you shared with me, and Katie Siverly here at the Kansas City Zoo, and then Tiffany Mayo for helping me design which way we're going with this. With that said, I don't consider myself a trumpeter swan expert by any sense. I am always and forever learning more about them. So any errors in this presentation are 100% mine, and don't hold those against the Trumpeter Swan Society. All right, I'm going to turn off my video so we can get started here. Oops, hold on one second. There we go. Technology and me, friends forever. There we go. All right. So here we go. Trumpeter swans. So this is one of our two swans we have here at the Kansas City Zoo. So just a basic overview of swans when you're looking at birds. Swans are waterfowl, so they have the big flat feet for swimming. They have waterproof feathers. And then amongst ducks, geese, and swans have the longest necks. This is a trumpeter swan because he's white. He's got the black bill and the black feet. When we zoom in a little bit closer, you can see how this black bill goes all the way to the eye, and you'll see a little bit of red, not on every individual, but on a lot of them, you'll see a little line there, which is often referred to as a lipstick line. Lots of feathers. That second picture on the right there, you can see that they have lots of feathers. So being a bird that spends time in water, you need those outer layers for waterproof, keep them dry, and then lots of fluffy downy feathers underneath to help keep them warm. So lots and lots of white feathers. Again, that black bill, black feet. All right, here's another individual there. This one doesn't have that lipstick line, but again, that black bill goes to the eye. All right, so let's look at some other swans. So there are several species of swans that you'll find here in North America. Trumpeter swans being the one we're focusing on today, but mute swans are also found here, though they were brought here by human beings, so not necessarily natively found here. They have that orange bill and that big knob on top of it, very similar size to trumpeters. And tundra swans, another one, looks like a smaller version of the trumpeter, but they also have some yellow you might find right up here on the top of their bill. It comes in various quantities, so some have bigger patches, others have smaller, so there's not one specific shape. So trumpeter swans tend to weigh up to about 30-ish pounds. The mute swans are similarly sized, and then tundras are a little bit smaller, so 20 pounds. For my metric friends, that's about 13.5 kilograms for the bigger swans and about 9 kilograms for the tundra. So a little bit smaller there. All right. Okay. All right. So moving on, we've got Trumpeter Swan Signet here with 2 adult tundra swans. So again, you can kind of see that yellow on their bills. All right. And then we've got a trumpeter swan and a mute swan. So again, you can kind of compare those sizes. They are pretty similar, similar in size. All right. Other white birds that you might be seeing in and around the same areas as trumpeter swans. So we've got snow geese. These friends are a lot smaller. They are geese, so geese have shorter necks. And then these friends have kind of pinkish to orangish, depending on the lighting they're in or the individual on their feet. Here's a little closer view of one of those. All right, so quick review. So trumpeter swans, the black bill, the little red line on their lip. Tundras have the yellow, mutes have the big knob, and then snow geese are smaller and that pink bill. One other friend that you might find, bird friend that you might find flying in and around trumpeter swans are pelicans. So this friend here, you can kind of get a good size comparison between them in and around trumpeter swans. So we're all up to date on them. Let's start looking at the cuteness. So this is a trumpeter swan signet. When they first hatch and through a good part of their life, the good part of their being a signet, they have those pink bills. They don't quite have the black yet, but that will come with time. They have little pink feet. All right. And because nature likes to play jokes on us, when we look at mute swans, they have the little blackish bills. So if you see a signet and it's got a black bill, ironically, that is not a trumpeter swan baby. All right. So mama swans are the nest builders, and they can build some pretty impressive nests. They can be 6 to 12 feet across and 18 inches high. That helps keep those eggs dry. So they live in wetlands. Water fluctuates and goes up and down, and that helps keep those eggs dry. So she's going to build this massive nest. Males will sometimes, at least here at our zoo, our male, I've frequently seen him help her gather supplies, but the construction and determining that it's just so is done completely by the female. Now, when she's got that nest built just the right way, in just the right secluded spot, she's going to start laying her eggs, and she lays an egg every other day until she's done. Now, what does something like that look like? So I had the great pleasure of checking our nest a couple of years ago. This is what I walked up to. And then when I uncovered, I found 7 eggs. She wasn't done yet. She still laid another 5. So we had a pretty good year with 12 eggs. Once she's done laying those eggs, that's when she's going to start sitting on that nest and incubate the eggs. So until all those eggs are laid, she doesn't sit on the nest and incubate. All right. So the female is going to hunker herself down onto those eggs ever so carefully. A lot of birds have what's called a brood patch. So it's a bare skin that they have kind of on their lower chest, abdomen area that they can kind of open up and spread out on their eggs to help keep those eggs warm. For trumpeter swans, they don't have that. So they use those downy feathers, the wings, and then they have their bare feet will also help to start that incubation. So She's sitting on the nest. She's caring for the nest. She's going to spin the eggs. She's going to move them around and adjust them so that they are incubated evenly. And the male's job is to protect. So before I go any farther, you may notice that this male swan on the left does have a yellow tag on his wing. So there are, as we go through pictures, you will see several that have tags, either wings or neck bands, and that'll indicate where they were tagged. So these are Ontario swans. They have the yellow wing tags. Here in the United States, we use a lot of neck bands, and different states use different colors. So mom's on the nest, dad is guarding. He's making sure nobody comes into their territory. He's going to protect from predators. So this next screen has just got a few of the predators that may go after those eggs, or once those babies hatch, go after them. So we've got eagles and coyotes and turtles and all kinds of friends. This is just a small sampling of what may go after them. And being an egg or being a small chick is a dangerous time in your life. So about 32 to 37 days after those eggs are laid and she starts incubating is when we start to see cygnets hatching. Within about the first 24 hours is when they will start to swim. So swans get all of their food in this time of year. They're going to be eating in the water, and it's some predators won't come into the water to get them. So in some ways it's a safer place to be, and mom and dad are going to be guarding them during this time. All right. So mom and dad are teaching them everything they need to do to be a swan. Now, this is our first video. This is one that I shot here at the Kansas City Zoo. So I don't have any sound on this video, so don't worry if you don't hear anything. But our cygnets were about a little bit over a week old when I took this video. They were in the water, and mom and dad were doing a behavior that parents do when they are feeding their chicks. So let me hit this. So you'll notice the stomping in the water. So the first one does it, then the other one will do it. What that's doing is stirring up bugs from in the water. And once those bugs float to the top, then the babies are gonna eat those. So adult swans are primarily gonna eat plant material, but the babies are gonna eat a lot of bugs. That's a lot of protein. They're growing really fast. So birds in general grow very quickly. There's safety in that size. So they go from wee little cute little floofs like they are here, and they start to get bigger right away. Again, hanging out with mom and dad. One parent is in this picture. I'm sure the other parent wasn't too far off, making sure that they are all perfectly safe. All right. So these friends probably a month or so old. As they get a little bit bigger, we get kind of into what I love to call the awkward teen. So a couple months into this, so they get into this awkward sort of gray, fluffy, not quite cute like the little ones, not quite elegant yet. But again, they're growing really quickly. They're following mom and dad and learning all those things. And most importantly, how to feed yourself. So there's not much cuter than swan backsides up into the air, tails up in the air, reaching down into that water to reach their food. The bill is starting to get a little darker. You can see where it's going towards the eye, and those bodies are getting big. All right. Now, during the rearing part of this, when the mom and dad have young cygnets, they go through a molting time where they grow in some new feathers, they lose their flight feathers and are unable to fly. They're not going to go anywhere at that time anyways. They're hanging out with their kids. As we get into late summer, early fall, they're going to start getting those flight feathers in, and the cygnets, the babies are getting ready to learn to fly. So they're going to do a lot of practicing flying in and out and landing, which is another important skill, because they are migratory birds, and you can't just wake up one day and run a marathon. They can't wake up one day and fly hundreds of miles. So they're learning to fly. Let's see, we've got another video. This one should have sound. So we're getting ready to take off flying, lots of head bobbing. And then watch as they run and flap their wings across the water. So you've got to run and get enough speed to get enough lift to get off of the water and take off flying. So after they've practiced their flying, after they've built up some strength there, winter is starting to come across. It's starting to get colder, days are getting shorter, water is freezing over. What decides it's the day to migrate, I don't know if anybody knows, but there's a lot of indicators as to what might be going on. It's going to be time to migrate and move to their springs or to their wintering grounds. So somewhere a little bit warmer. They're not going to Florida and sitting on the beach, but they are going to go somewhere slightly warmer, where the water is open, and where they can find food and have that open water. You might notice this friend right here has a neckband on, so that is one of our tagged swans. Okay. And so they're going to start congregating in larger groups on some of these ponds that stay open. It might be a river, it could be other places that have enough open water. You're going to find swans, you may find some ducks and some geese all roosting there at night. Being on that water and for safety. And then during the days, they frequently will go out into cornfields and eat a lot of the corn that fell off during harvest. And so that's how they're going to spend a lot of their time in the wintering grounds. Now, when they get caught up into some really extreme cold weather, snowstorms, things like that, they are able to tuck themselves all in, fold themselves back on themselves to stay warm. So that smaller surface area helps keep them nice and warm. So other activities during this wintering time, they're going to get into pecking order disputes. They're usually very short-lived, usually involves some nipping and biting or flapping wings and swimming and flying at each other kind of things. Nothing too over the top. But the typical pecking order is the top of the pile is the families with the most cygnets, then the families with swans with just families, then we get into the pairs, and then the lone swans are kind of on the bottom of that. And then there's also love is in the air. So swans are reinforcing their bonds between pairs that are already bonded, and any new forms or bonds that are any new pairs that are bonding. It's happening during this time. We've got another little video here. This one should also have sound. And these, the two that we've seen already with sound, those are from the Trumpeter Swan Society YouTube page. So if you're enjoying these, there are a bunch of really good videos on there to check out. So with this one, there'll be one pair, and I'll try to put my cursor by it so that you can see them. They're going to do some head bobbing, some chest bumping, some wing flapping. And that's just confirming their bond. There's also a little squabbling going on among some other swans in the background. So you get to see a little bit of all the activities that you would see during this wintering time. All right, so we've got this pair right here. Head bobs, the wing flaps. And these friends over here are the ones that are in a little bit of an argument. A discussion, if you will. There we go. All right. Technology, my friend. So days are going to start growing longer as winter goes into spring. Temperatures are going to increase. And again, that magic day comes when families are going to migrate back to their breeding or summer range. All right. Once those cygnets that hatched the previous year make it back into that area, mom and dad are done. So much like I just let my college graduate kid move out of my house, it is time for them to move on and find their own way in the world. And it's time to start over. So mom and dad are going to start all over again with this year's cygnets. And the cycle starts over again. And it's my opinion that you can't have too many cygnet pictures. So we're going to have just a few here for you to enjoy, because I can't think of anything cuter. All right. So that's kind of the year in the life of swans. We're going to just touch a little bit on some of the concerns swans have, some of the dangers that humans pose to swans and other wildlife. One of the bigger ones is habitat loss. Trumpeter swans spend a good portion of their lives in wetlands. Kind of have they aren't the beach, they aren't the mountains, they aren't a lot of things, but they are really important, not only to the animals that live there, but to humans too. So habitat loss is a really big problem for swans and really all kinds of animals around the world. Power lines, so especially power lines that are near their roosting areas, the waters that they like to take off and land into, they're really hard to see. So this was a photograph that was taken of power lines. And if you look at this top one over here, you can barely see it in the photograph. I can't imagine being a bird flying through there or trying to take off and being able to dodge around that. There are solutions to that problem. They can add diverters, so different kinds of devices that hang from those lines, which make them much more visible to birds flying through. Here's one, if anybody out there enjoys fishing. That's a fantastic, fun thing to do, but being mindful of any of these things that you use, avoiding any lead weights or sinkers would be a really critical thing. Lead is one of the real problems that trumpeter swans have, and there isn't a good solution, but it does help if we stop putting more into the water. And then fishing line is another issue. They can get, if it's left behind, they can get tangled in it. It's hard for us to see fishing line. I imagine it's not easy when you're a wild animal either. So lots of animals can get caught in that fishing line. So making sure you dispose of that. Okay. And then bread. I was a kid at one point a long time ago, and I can remember feeding birds and animals bread, not thinking anything of it, but it can actually make them very ill. So letting wildlife find their own way and find their own food is a great way to to be. If you feel like you do need to feed animals, wild waterfowl and swans would love some frozen vegetables or a bag of lettuce, something simple like that would be a much better choice for them and much healthier. So bread, not great for swans. All right. So there were a few things that I thought were really kind of fun and interesting that didn't make it into the talk so far. So we're going to go through a few fun trumpeter swan facts. They have nostrils. Birds have nostrils. So they don't have a structure on their face like we do, just for those nostrils, but they are located right there on that bill. And so they do have nostrils. Trumpeter swans have feathers on their eyelids. Not all birds have feathers on their eyelids, but these guys live where it's cold, and that I imagine would help keep them nice and warm. They spend a lot of time taking care of their feathers. So that's called preening. I do have a video. This one will have no sound. Good. All right. So this is one of our swans here at the zoo, and he's working really hard on his feathers. So feather maintenance is really important for swans. You know, those flight feathers, making sure that they are ready to go. And then, you know, you got to rinse yourself off. So I also figured y'all would want to see the underside of a swan. And then they also, as part of that maintenance, they spread oil on their feathers to make them waterproof. So at the top of their tail, at the base of it, on their body, they have a gland. It's called a preen gland. Also has a big sciencey word. We'll just leave it at a preen gland. So they grab that with their beak. They'll spread it on their bill, and then they spread it on their feathers. So I did capture one of our swans doing that. This is another silent video, but I didn't get her when she got to that preen gland, but she's got that oil on her bill, and she is spreading it over her feathers to help make sure that it's all over and she stays nice and waterproof. So if you're living in water, you don't want that water to soak in all the way to your skin. And they have toenails. So you see a cute little foot there. So you can see they have those toenails. That's really good for helping stir up things off the bottom of the pond. It's good for slippery surfaces, maybe some mud, or when they're on the snow and ice, that gives them some good traction. So they have toenails. All right. I have made it through most of my presentation, but who doesn't want to see a swan upside down again? So, well, if you have any specific questions down the road or want to contact me, that is my email address here at the zoo. And I think it's great because here at the zoo, the very first animal in all of the zoo are our trumpeter swans because they're the best. All right. Marianne, did we have any questions that anybody posed that need an answer?
Yes, we do, Kelly.
Right.
So the first question is from William. I always see the trumpeter swans bobbing their heads just before taking off the water. Are they communicating in some way?
They are communicating. So I can't directly translate what they're saying, but it is definitely a way that they communicate in, hey, it's time to go. Do you think we should go? And then they just take off. So they are definitely talking swan, but I don't know if I can completely translate that. But yes, that is part of their way of of knowing when to take off.
Another question from Michigan. Trumpeter swans were recently taken off the endangered list in the state of Michigan, and they have been very successful there. Have any other states taken the trumpeter swan off of their endangered list?
That is a really good question. I know that there are several states that have taken them off. I don't believe they're on Iowa's list anymore. If any of our panelists have a better knowledge of that, I would appreciate some help on that, because I am not up to date on who's still got them on their endangered list or not. But I know the central part of the United States is doing better than some of the other areas. I don't know if anybody knows.
Well, this is Margaret, just to pop in here. So
Okay.
just so you guys know, trumpeter swans are not on the federally endangered list. Now, when states did their restoration programs, usually one of the precipitating factors of that is, first of all, they had to be in the state historically, but then it became a species of concern. And so that was one of the, like a state concern species kind of a thing. So I don't know that it's on any endangered list. Now, Gary, we may be able to get back to you, maybe probably in e-news with this as well. We can talk to some other, PhD biologists to see what they say. But anyway, it's not endangered. And as trumpeter swans are recovering in different states, there's a sort of a plateau that they reach, or a threshold that they reach, that the states decided that it's reached a level where the swans can now sustain themselves, where they have enough swans on the ground to be able to nest successfully and continue to grow. And so that's when they're normally taken off of these lists, is the state has decided that at that threshold, they're going to continue to do well and continue to grow as a population.
Thank you, Margaret. Kelly, we do have more questions. This one is from Darlene. You said 7+ eggs on one nest. How many typically survive per year on average?
That is a really good question. I don't know any panelists with any insight onto that. I know here at the zoo, we have a higher survival rate because we have less concerns with predators. But in the wild, I know there have been some studies, but I don't know that I have any of that data in front of me right now.
I can tackle that. It's Jim Hawkins
Thank
here in
you.
Whitehorse.
Thank you, Jim.
It's highly variable. If there's a really good breeding season, you might have average brood sizes at this time of year of 4 or 5. And if it's been really bad, early freeze up, something like that, you might have a lot of broods that don't even get to flight. They get frozen out before they even get to the flight stage. So it's really, really variable, and there's going to be more variation in the far north, where they can get frozen before they can fly. So it'll in any one year it'll vary across the country, across the continent, depending on where there's drought and where there's nasty weather during nesting, and so on and so forth. So there's no sort of single answer to that question.
Thank you, Jim.
This is Margaret. So, one of the things we say is an average brood might be 3 to 6, but the other thing we also say is for that first summer, you might lose a quarter of them. So let's say you have 4 cygnets at the beginning of the summer. Well, maybe by the end you have 2 or 3. And so out of 4 cygnets, by the time, and again, this is what Trumpeter Swan Society says, is by the time they reach breeding stage, maybe 1 out of the 4 has survived to, breeding age. They might be lost to power line collisions or lead poisoning or predators or, drought or, whatever. So they can hatch a lot, but however many make it to the end of the summer is also variable. And as Jim had mentioned, it depends on the weather, the droughts, the water level, the food, the predators, and all that. So.
Thank you, Margaret. We're getting a lot of great questions. We'll answer as many as we can, so please keep asking. The next question, Kelly, is from Elaine. how much are you expecting drought to affect where the swans are this year? For example, water levels are much lower in places like DeSoto National Wildlife Refuge in Nebraska and Iowa.
Well, I think as we were talking about how many hatch, that weather is a big factor. So, if there's not enough water, there's not going to be enough places for these swans to be. So I imagine that where the drought is bad, it's going to not do well for the birds. I don't know if at any time any panelist wants to jump in and help. That's fine. These are a little more technical than Kelly, the educator, can handle. I'm not a researcher and I'm not a biologist. I am.
Well, this is Margaret. I'll just
Yeah,
pop in.
thank you,
So,
Margaret.
Yeah, so with drought, that does affect, because as the wetlands dry up, there's, more probability of being attacked by predators. And that's one of, besides being able to find the food, the submerged food and whatever, they're also more vulnerable to attack. So I know that a couple years ago in Oregon, when they had the wildfires there, it was really droughty, and the smoke, and I don't think there were any cygnets that hatched at all during that drought year. So drought does, because they need the wetlands, they need the water, for the food and for learning to fly. They just need the water. So people, not people, but swan parents can lose cygnets it might have been good conditions at the beginning of the summer, but maybe during summer it dries up, and if there's not enough water and those cygnets haven't learned to fly yet, sometimes they have to hike around or walk to a different wetland. And if there's not another wetland nearby, then, that's extremely problematic, where they could, the young birds could get attacked by a predator. So drought is a serious issue.
Our next question, I think, Jim, you might want to tackle this one first, and then we can open it up if any of the other panelists have anything. This one comes from Anne. The province of British Columbia was ravaged by fires this past summer. Will this affect the swans' migration in any way as they head south?
That's a really, really good question. I think a lot of the swans in Western Canada haven't actually migrated yet. I live in Whitehorse, and it's been very warm up here, and they still haven't started to migrate yet that I know of. A lot of people are interested in that. I don't know if anybody has an answer, but a lot of them, some of them may have been affected during their nesting season and while they were trying to raise young, because a lot of Western Canada was basically on fire this summer. So I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that yet, but there's an awful lot of people that want to know that answer. So it'll be interesting to see as the dust clears after this fire season, what the impact has been, what sort of numbers of young birds do we have that are going to end up going south.
Thanks, Jim. I would imagine that's something that we and other organizations will be watching closely. So stay tuned to hear more on that. Another question about migration. Do transplanted swans have the ability to migrate, for example, from Ontario to the US East Coast or from Michigan to the Platte River in Nebraska?
You want me to tackle that one?
Sure.
Yeah, I think they'll basically winter as far north as they can, like the ones in Ontario or Michigan or whatever. If they don't get frozen out of the places where they can find food in the fall, they'll probably stay. But when the ice comes and the food runs out, that's when they'll go north. But I think their tendency is to stay as far north as they can. But you want to add to that, Margaret? That's my take on it anyways.
Yep. So most of you that get e-news, about the GPS tracking, the Midwest swan tracking research study that's been going on. And that's one of the things they actually wanted to find out is, where are these swans migrating to, how many, what's the distance that they go? It's really, what are they doing during the year? And one of the findings from that is, as Jim had said, is, if you're in the far north, let's say Manitoba, and it freezes over in the wintertime, those Manitoba birds, swans, are going to go further south. And so this tracking study has shown that those swans are going to Minnesota and Missouri and even down to Arkansas. Whereas if there's open water, as there is in Michigan or Ohio, those birds can tend to stay in the wintertime fairly close to where they are in the summertime, because really what they need is food and open water. And if one of those is missing, that's what makes them, tend to migrate. And then it's a question of, is there a pattern that's happening? And that's what this GPS tracking study is doing in the Midwest.
Thank you. Another question from Elaine: is avian flu a threat to the swans?
Oh, I can answer that one. Yes. It is a threat to most birds. So I know here at the zoo, during migration time, the last couple of seasons, we've pulled a lot of our birds inside, pulled them off of any exhibits where any wild birds can fly into. And so it is a threat. At this time, there isn't any approved vaccinations that we can even give them. So it's definitely a problem. Yeah. I don't know if anybody can speak to what we're finding in wild populations.
Thank
It is
you.
it is a problem, I think, and something that all the agencies are trying to keep a pretty close eye on.
Thanks, Jim. This is another question about migrating swans. So the swans in Ontario aren't native to Ontario. Much of them are replants from the West. Do these swans migrate at all?
I'm going to answer that. They're actually, those birds were restored to Ontario through the efforts of Harry Lumsden. And so, eggs were collected and, breeders had raised some swans and the cygnets were released and that kind of thing. So the swans that are actually in Ontario, for the most part, most of those have actually hatched there. And that's where, they live there now. That's their home. So they do migrate. And that's one of the things that hopefully we're going to have a presentation about that, as well as what's going on with the Ontario birds. So the Ontario folks that's one of the reasons they put the wing tags on those swans, is that's to be able to track them. And so those Ontario birds have been found, as far south as Virginia, maybe even a little bit further south. And, they're in Michigan, and this summer there was one Ontario bird that was in Wisconsin, and they in Ohio, they were there. So that's one of the things I find out through our Trumpeter Watch program. But Ontario has tracked and mapped where the Ontario birds are being seen. So, and then they had the history of that where, they hatched in XYZ and they got the tag and ABC and, it hatched to these parents or whatever. So the Ontario birds, that's their home territory now. So they were restored, I don't know, 20, 30 years or so ago. So that's what's going on with the Ontario birds.
Thanks, Margaret. Kelly, this one's for you.
Okay.
How do you keep swans from migrating away from the zoo?
Oh, so here at our zoo, our birds that we have been pinioned. They came that way into our collection. So that means they have had a small bone removed from one of their wings, so they aren't able to fly. We did not do that to those swans, but there's a couple different ways. So some exhibits have a top on them, so some birds stay on exhibit that way. Others, we can trim feathers on one wing. So sometimes we trim wings just on the one side, so you don't want them even. That helps prevent them from flying away. That's a great question.
Well, thank you. Here's another one for the panel. How serious is snapping turtle predation?
Do you want me to answer? And this is Tiffany Mayo.
Thanks, Tiffany. Please do.
Yes, snapping turtles are definitely a predator of trumpeter swans, especially little cygnets. I know at our zoo, we need to watch out for snapping turtles and making sure that our cygnets are safe. The interesting thing is I've actually in the wild seen adult trumpeter swans actually protect their cygnets by stomping on top of snapping turtles and getting them to move away from their family. So yes, they could definitely cause harm and take cygnets out. But the adult swans do a great job. They are not a predator of adult swans, and adult trumpeter swans do a great job of protecting their cygnets.
Thank you, Tiffany. Here's a question from Ishrat, who saw photographed and reported trumpeter swans for the very first time this year in July in Vaughan, Ontario. Coming from the Mississippi Gulf Coast and seeing a flock of geese that roots in the pond near the CB base, he's never seen swans in the Mississippi Gulf area. So how far south do they range?
Margaret?
This is Margaret. So
Yeah.
historically, before they were pretty much hunted, you know, in extirpation in the lower 48, they would go down as far as the Gulf. So, you know, pre-European settlement, and this is based on Hudson Bay records and other records of, you know, explorers and whatever, is trumpeter swans were seen in Texas and along the Gulf coast. But, you know, in the 1880s or the, you know, 1800s and early 1900s, they were pretty much hunted to extinction. And so that's where the restoration program across, you know, the Midwest, you know, where they went up to Alaska, collected the eggs, brought them back and released them in the different states or whatever. That's what's going on right now, is those swans have been pioneering into new areas. So one of the reasons the states went up to Alaska is they knew that those birds had migratory genes, you know, that they were programmed genetically to migrate. So they wanted to have that genetic capacity when they brought them down and hatched those eggs and released the cygnets in the Midwest. And so that's what's been exciting to watch, is as these swans were restored in certain areas, is where were they showing up in new areas. So we know that, I mean, there's a big wintering area in Heber Springs, Arkansas, which is sort of north of Little Rock, and that's about 200 to 400 trumpeter swans go there. And, you know, they show up in Tennessee. Once in a great while, they might show up in Texas, but they show up in Southern Illinois and in Missouri. So they haven't really reached the limits that they had, you know, pre-European settlement. So it's very rare if you're down in the Gulf to see a trumpeter swan. If you were to go up to Heber Springs, Arkansas, you can see them. But the further north you're going to go, you're going to see them. But those are all the results of the restoration programs that, you know, the Midwest states did.
Thank you, Margaret. Which is better, patagial or net tags?
I'm assuming the patagial is the wing tag versus the neck band. So just so you know, I don't know that there's any difference between them in terms of safety or whatever. So the states have used the neck bands. And just so you guys know, sometimes people get concerned that they think the neck bands look like they're choking the swans. Well, neck bands for birds are actually specifically designed for each species. So it's made to, you know, fit that neck. I think one of the reasons Ontario uses the wing tags is, first of all, they have a wing tag usually on both wings, and it's much more visible. And when Ontario does their presentation, Kina or whoever will do that, you know, can talk about why they use the wing tags, but it was just something that Ontario chose to do. I don't know that there's one safety issue or performance issue that's better than the other. Both of them fall off. So with neck bands, those are made out of plastic, and over time they crack and, you know, they fall off. And I often get trumpeter watch reports where maybe a trumpeter swan, Ontario trumpeter swan, might have one wing tag that's left where the other one has fallen off. So it's just Ontario uses wing tags and the states use neck bands and the leg bands.
I think there was amongst the scientific community, there was some concern about the neck bends getting iced up in extremely cold weather.
Mhm.
And I think that was maybe one of the reasons that Ontario went to the wing tags, but I don't know for sure.
This is another one that I don't think the panel will necessarily be able to answer completely, but perhaps there's a reference that we could refer Catherine to. Does anyone know what the laws are regarding feeding swans, which of course would vary by state?
Well, there aren't really any laws regarding feeding swans, so there isn't any law so about that. And I know, again, I get a lot of Trumpeter Watch reports where people are saying, hey, somebody's feeding bread or whatever it is to the trumpeters here, and the trumpeters become quite tame. Years ago, out in the Yellowstone area where it was really icy, there was artificial feeding going on by the Fish and Wildlife Service and at Red Rock Lakes, and that was discontinued because one of the reasons was that the Fish and Wildlife Service wanted those birds to be able to fend for themselves. So right now, certainly for the Trumpeter Swan Society and the Fish and Wildlife Service, and I think most of the state agencies, they do not encourage artificial feeding of waterfowl or wild birds just because they want those birds to stay wild. So there's nothing prohibiting people from doing that. It's just that education at some point would say, hey, let's let the swans get the best food that they've evolved to eat, which is the nutrition that they would find, in the wetland, that's the very best food for them. So.
Thanks, Margaret. For this next question, Kelly, maybe you could answer first, and then Tiffany, you could answer after. Mary's asking, are the swans born at the Kansas City Zoo later released into the wild? And so after Kelly answers for Kansas City, Tiffany, maybe you could also answer for Cleveland.
The short answer is yes, and we've been doing that for several years, releasing swans into the wild. We do raise them here at the zoo with mom and dad through the fall. Until recently, Iowa has been our release location. But Iowa is one of our great success stories and does not need any more swans. So we are, and Tiffany will be able to go into that more detail, but we're moving on to other places. But yes, we have released a lot of our cygnets in the wild. We've had some go to other zoos for breeding purposes too. So just depends on what the needs are within our zoo world, and then releasing into the wild. Yeah.
So Kelly actually did a great job explaining that. I am the Trumpeter Swan AZA program leader. So what I do is I actually pair up different swans at different zoos and then find places for those cygnets. And like Kelly said, a lot of those cygnets do get released in the wild for different reintroduction programs, and that's been extremely successful. Over 25 zoos just helped with Iowa's program. So zoos have played an integral role in restoration of trumpeter swans in the wild. And then, like also Kelly said, though, some cygnets do go to different zoos. Either a new zoo might want to house trumpeter swans at their zoo, or maybe one of their swans passed away and needs another mate. And so we will move swans around that way as well. But that is a great question. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Tiffany. The next question is from Teresa. What are
Mary,
some?
can I just interrupt you? So just so you guys know, one of the exciting things, especially if you're members, thank you for being a member and supporting this, is, we're working on releasing cygnets from the zoos as well as our captive pair out into the Oregon wild. So just so you guys know, is, a zoo doesn't just go and release a swan somewhere. It actually has to be part of a restoration program. So there's a process, there's a whole process and approval thing that has to go through. So right now, even though Iowa's restoration program, has stopped because it's met its goals. We're going to be doing that in Oregon. So if you're a member, you're going to be reading about that in trumpeting. So that was it. Thanks, Marianne.
Thank you, Margaret. The next question is from Teresa. She's wondering what are ways that she can directly conserve swans? What are some types of fieldwork opportunities that are available?
Well, I don't know where she lives, but I know Ontario looks for volunteers maybe, and again, Kina will be able to verify this. I think they have volunteers that go out and, count the swans, went during the swan count in early February, and I'm not sure how many volunteers they need for, the tagging that's going on. But Ontario would be the best place, because most of the other places in let's say the Midwest don't have ongoing restoration programs where they need help. So one of the ways you can help conserve it, it's kind of indirect, is if you see a swan, you can use our Trumpeter Watch report and take pictures of it and let me know where the location is, because then if it's in a certain location, I send that report and the photos to the appropriate state or provincial person who's tracking the swans. And that way they'll know if that's a new area where a swan is appearing, or if it confirms a nesting season or whatever. So that's it's indirect, but that's one of the ways you can help, is just, reporting trumpeter swans, whether they're marked or unmarked, which means if they have a tag or a neck collar, or if they don't have anything, using our Trumpeter Watch report, and then I can share that with the appropriate person in the state or province.
You can also participate in programs like eBird, which is a really good way to keep track of all bird movements, but trumpeters fit right in there. Or something like iNaturalist is also a very good citizen science program to put your sightings into. So there's 3 possibilities there.
Okay, and I'm gonna suggest one more thing. And this is not to do with Trumpeter Swan specifically, but one of the things that Trumpeter Swan Society is trying to do, we're trying to raise awareness about the importance of wetlands. So the bird cannot be separated from the habitat, and a lot of people are not maybe aware of all the benefits and the importance of wetlands. And so become a subscriber to our Instagram account, because I'm trying to share some of the beauty of the plants and animals that are on there. But I think if you have a wetland that is in danger, you're saving the habitat of hundreds of plants and animals, if you do that. So that's one way to conserve, is just, find out what you can do with the habitat. And maybe it's just working with a land trust, or, something where you're helping keep that, protect that habitat, which is super important.
Thank you. Some really good ideas there. Now moving back into some questions about swans and swan behavior. Are trumpeters active against mute swans when there's a territorial interaction?
I can say what Harry Lumsden out in Ontario, where Ontario has trumpeters and mute swans. So it's sort of give and take. It used to be thought that that mute swans would drive out the more gentle trumpeter swans. But Harry also observed that trumpeter swans could do the same with mute swans. So it's sort of up in the air as to who's going to win. And it might be dependent upon, let's say the size of the family, or who's had that territory longest. So if a trumpeter swan comes into, let's say it's Ontario, into a nesting territory that mute swans have had for years, those mute swans are going to, drive that pair or that single swan off. And the same thing happens if trumpeter swans have claimed, that nesting territory for themselves. So it isn't like we know that, hey, mute swans win all the time or trumpeter swans win all the time. It depends on the situation at the time.
Thanks,
Marianne,
Mark.
I'm just wondering how many others. It's already an hour, and I'm wondering
We have 3 more questions.
Okay.
So this next one is from William, who lives near Elkona Pond, which is part of the Au Sable River system and has a large winter population of trumpeter swans. He's wondering, what do they eat during the winter, and if it's possible that they would eat the invasive snails in the river system.
I can tackle that one if you like. To my knowledge, trumpeter swans are basically vegetarians. And if they're eating any of those snails, it's probably just because they happen to be attached to some plants. I'm not aware of any instances where they deliberately eat snails or any other animals, except when they're really young and they'll eat insects, I think, when they're just small cygnets. Margaret, can you add anything to that?
No, and I don't think there's been any studies, to see if trumpeter, could be used for invasive species control. So there haven't been any studies about that. So,
They're
and in the
vegetarians,
time, I think they
basically.
just eat whatever food is there, available in the substrate, in the sediment.
But it's vegetarian stuff.
Yeah, vegetarian.
Yeah.
So the next one is from Ruth. She wants to know a good way to tell the difference between trumpeters and tundra swans.
Well, I would say size is probably your biggest indicator. Trumpeters are quite a bit bigger, at least a good third larger. And then those tundras have a little more yellow on that bill if you're close enough to see that. But size is probably the biggest. And they do sound different. So trumpeter swans definitely make a honking trumpeter sound, and those tundras sound quite a bit different.
The sound is probably the best thing, and
Yeah.
you can hear those sounds online. I think you can hear them on the Trumpeter Swan website, or there's a bunch of other places on the internet. You can get the sounds of trumpeters or tundras. Another good thing, if you're in a place where there's a lot of swans migrating, is trumpeter swans tend to fly in much smaller flocks, like family groups, or maybe up to 20 or so in a flock, if they're undertaking a good sized migration. Tundra swans, you often will see them in flocks of 100 or more. And so that's another kind of semi-useful thing.
Yeah, and eBird would also be a good thing to see who spotted what.
Absolutely,
Where.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the next question is from Greg, and he wants to know which parts of the life of a trumpeter swan are best understood, and which parts of the life does the panel think merit further study and observation?
Well, this is Margaret, and I'm going to say one of the reasons that they're doing the GPS tracking study is to find out, where they're migrating, where they're stopping, and that kind of thing, because that's a really transitory type kind of behavior. And I think that's probably been the least studied. So they can study them more where they're sedentary, where they're nesting. So that's where there've been a lot of studies on nesting swans, and it's easier to observe them in the wintertime. I'm not sure how many wintering studies there have been, but this whole migration thing has not been studied because the birds aren't there long enough, really. They're just in and out, to study them. That's what the tracking study is doing with the collars, is what kind of water bodies are they using, how long are they staying in a place, how much time are they feeding versus being on the water. So those are some of the questions that are being looked at for the tracking study. So hopefully we'll get some answers to some of these things from the GPS study.
Thank you, Margaret. We have one more question that snuck in, and I'm going to go ahead and ask it because I think it's a really good tie-in to ending the webinar. And that's from John. He'd like to know how to become a Trumpeter Swan Society member.
Oh, that's great. Well, the next slide will have our website. So what you want to do is go to our website, and right on the home page, there's like become a member. It's really easy under how to help. It's right there as well. We'd love to have you become a member. You'd be supporting some wonderful programs, not only like webinars like this, but restoration out in the West, and research, and all kinds of really cool things. So that's what I would suggest. So thank you for asking that. I appreciate that. Okay. So I think we can wrap this up now. Is that right, Marianne? Looks good. Okay, great. Okay. Well, everyone, thanks so much for coming. I really appreciate you being here and sticking around this long. And right after this, as soon as your browser closes, there's going to be a very short survey. And really what I want to find out from this, only 4 questions. I kind of want to know what other topics you want to hear about, what you want to learn about, and also when we should hold these webinars, in the daytime or in the evening. So, and then a recording is being made, and I think I have it set up to go out within 2 days of this. I've never done this before, so it's going to be a new experience for me. If you have any questions, go to our trumpeterswansociety.org website. We have tons of information. You can email me at the ttss@trumpeterswansociety.org. And Kelly, thanks so much for doing that wonderful presentation. And, Jim and Marianne and Tiffany, thanks for, being the panelists as well to help answer these questions.
Yes, I needed a lot of help. Thank you to you too, Margaret.
All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. We're gonna end this now, and I really appreciate you coming to our very first inaugural webinar. So thanks so much. Appreciate that.